Welcome back to Ohio Counseling Conversations, the official podcast of the Ohio Counseling Association, bringing you updates and conversations from around the state. On this episode, we're privileged to sit down with Dr. Sean Gorby, a multifaceted professional whose expertise spans counseling, advocacy, and beyond. Dr. Gorby shares his insights gleaned from his rich experiences in the counseling profession, offering a glimpse into the intricacies of balancing multiple roles and their interconnectedness. As the long-standing government relations chair for the Ohio Counseling Association, he sheds light on the meaningful impact of advocacy efforts and the dynamic interplay between clinical practice and political engagement. Join us as we explore and discuss the vital role of advocacy in empowering counselors to effect change. Dr. Gorby leaves us with thought-provoking reflections on the essential conversations counselors should be having in our state and beyond. And I'm your host today, Dr. Marisa Cargill, a counselor and counselor educator in Northeast Ohio. Let's dive in. Well, welcome back to Ohio Counseling Conversations. I'm your host, Marisa Cargill, and today we are super excited to have Dr. Sean Gorby with us. And maybe you've heard his name or seen his name in your email inbox from time to time. But Sean, thank you for joining us. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in our profession.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I know this podcast has been up and running and it's been conversation for many years. And so to see it and see the great work that you're doing and now to be a part of it is super cool. I've done a couple podcasts in my life, but I've listened to way more. And so to be on this end of it is always cool. So thanks for having
We're
me.
excited to have you. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. I could talk for a little while or a short while. I'll give you the cliff notes here.
Yeah.
As you said, my name is Dr. Sean Gorby. I'm an assistant professor at Capital University here in Columbus, Ohio. I've been here for 5 years now at Capital. I'm also a owner and clinical director of a private practice in Lancaster, Ohio, which is where I reside with my wife and 3 boys who are 9, 7, and 2, and keep me hopping. And we live on a small farm just outside of the city here. So those are kind of my 2 professional roles and a little of my family. And I'm involved in several capacities of service and leadership. And as you mentioned, maybe some listeners have heard or seen my name in emails because our team sends out a lot of emails as interface. But for the last 7 years, I've served as the chairperson for the Government Relations Committee, which is the committee within the Ohio Counseling Association that is engaged and in tune and connected with anything that's happening in the state as it relates to policy or legislation, as it impacts our work as counselors, as it impacts the delivery or receiving of services for our clients here in the state of Ohio, as well as just overall social justice initiatives that are specific or pertinent to our clients or to the field. And this year, for the first time, I have a co-chair, Dr. Stephanie Durkar from Cleveland State. And so we have a phenomenal team. I'm completely biased, but it's the best committee in the OCA, not only because of the work that we do, but the people that are on our team. So that's a little bit about me, maybe on the surface. And if you have any questions as we go along, Marisa, I know we go back several years, and so you might know some things, but feel free to ask me.
Yeah, no, and I want to say a special thanks to you because as we developed the podcast, you were a critical element of that, advocating that like information be shared in some different ways. And so we know that, your voice and counselors' voices are really important to how our profession is operating in the state and maybe even at some larger levels. So thank you for all of your service. We reviewed a lot of information about you to prepare for the interview. And so our team noticed, and it's a theme with maybe a lot of counselor educators, but that you wear a lot of hats. So tell us, even in sharing some of them that you wear already, how do you balance those roles and how do they influence each other?
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is the heartbeat of a lot of associations or organizations, right? Is that people that are passionate about this, which I certainly am, about counseling in general, but then about professional associations and how they shape and influence and inform the work we do. And not only that, but just how they can serve the members and even non-members, right? We have a ton of non-members that are able to do better work as counselors. So anyways, I think that's the heartbeat of associations, where you have people that are passionate and get involved. And so they try to do and give as much as they can. And so I'm just one of the many here at OCA that try to take whatever I have and allow that to be beneficial for members and non-members here in the state of Ohio. I was having a conversation the other day with some faculty and with a couple of my students, and this term like time management comes up a lot. And so when you ask, how do I manage many of those hats? Time management, I think, is an important one. I think time management can mean a lot of different things. For me, what time management means is just that I'm being productive and efficient in the work that I'm doing. If you ask my students, that doesn't mean that I get grading back within 24 hours of submission or even 1 week or 2 weeks. But what that means is that my time is productive. And so I think one of the ways that I'm able to wear many hats is I just try to be as productive as I can in the time that I have spent. For me, that also is sleep. People say to me, or they have said recently, like, when do you sleep? This is probably a sentiment for a lot of people. I think one of the reasons why I'm able to wear many hats is because I get good sleep. I'm trying, thanks to my wife. I used to be a night owl, but after 14 years of marriage, I'm now I'm not a night owl, but I'm not a morning person. I've never been. Now I sleep, and so I get to sleep somewhat early, and I get a good night's sleep, and then that allows me to be productive during the days, and some days more productive than others. And then I would also say, the one way that I'm able to wear many hats is just because of the support that I have and the collaboration that I have. So anything that you see my name on, or anything that you see my face or hear my voice, it's not me. I'm just the person that is in the position to be able to communicate those things. It's an entire team of support, going back to to my wife and to my family, going to the support of my team at Renaissance Counseling and Consultation, which is the private practice. Our faculty at Capital, our students at Capital, that just always blow me away, and in their abilities and their skills and their willingness to serve. And so I would say those are the things that allow me to wear many hats, kind of the passion and desire that I have to serve, the time management or efficiency or effectiveness with some sleep. But then ultimately, it's a collaborative effort. And so I'm just really lucky to serve alongside some really great people and a really great team. Really is this, how do we do more, together than we can just individually? And so I think I'm a true testament to that.
Yeah. Like, you don't have to do it alone. The support helps, paired with some of these other like really critical elements of sleep and time management, and having all those tools together kind of helps the success of all the hats.
And I will say too, like, if you look at all of my hats, I'd say for the most part, although I get distracted by shiny things often, for the most part, a lot of my hats, at least professionally, are all similar type of hats. Right, using this analogy of a hat, is I'm not taking off and putting on completely different hats. It's just looking a little bit different, which is huge, right? So I mean, I say this all the time about my clinical work and my practice, as well as my teaching. There are people, faculty members and experts around the country that know way more than I do about a specific theory or about intervention, and even some of the things that I think I know some stuff about. There are people that know way more about assessments and way more about research and way more about diversity, some of these things that I teach. But what I think allows me to be effective as a teacher or an educator is the clinical work that I do, and then inverse, right? So these hats that they're not different; they're in the same line. And so when I'm doing clinical work, right, I'm going into my classroom later that afternoon or that evening, and we're talking about an ethical dilemma that maybe I've just recently experienced. And so you look at all my hats, although there are a lot of them, there's some synergy around them. There's this overlap that me spending time, and this maybe goes back to the effectiveness or the efficiency, me spending time doing clinical work is actually making small investments or benefits or growth in my teaching or education. And my teaching and education then does the same for my clinical work, and same for my advocacy work, and in the research that I do for action research or to inform policy at the licensure board. All of these things tend to work together, so that when I'm investing or trying to move forward one agenda maybe we're testifying against a bill. That's also information that then I can take back to my students. And so it's all kind of moving in the same line.
Yeah.
And like I said, some things are shiny and I can get distracted. But I try to make sure that it's not taking my energy and effort so far off that then these other things lie dormant. But rather, when I do invest in something, there's also some, secondary impact that they have. And so I think I've been intentional about trying to cultivate that, and yeah, and move those collectively forward.
Yeah, they're symbiotic, like they inform one another, so that you don't have to go too far out of your way, like that you stay in your lane in some ways, but the lane is wide because it has a few different um, elements. Yeah, cool. One of the biggest hats that you wear, and why people might recognize your name is like you said, because you've been serving as OCA's government relations chair for quite some time now, co-chair. How has this role been meaningful for you?
Yeah. In First of all, if you would have asked me if you would have asked high school Sean, hey, at some point, in your career, you will overlap the things that you enjoy with policy and legislation and advocacy.
Mm.
I would have said you're nuts, because we hear these things like legislative advocacy, or we hear these things like politics. We hear these buzzwords that are so ingrained in our life, but at least me as a high school student, and I know other people are like, not for me. I'm totally out. I don't want that. I would have said, yeah, no, you're misinformed. That's not going to be me. But now here, many years later, serving in these roles, and it's meaningful for me because it didn't start out with this big passion for politics or legislation or advocacy. What it started out for me was that I was doing work. I wanted to be able to give back and serve. I was hearing stories of my clients. I was experiencing barriers in my own work. I was experiencing barriers from my clients. I was recognizing this impact that I had the ability to have in our ability to serve our clients. And those just started to run in the same lane with government relations, governmental affairs, policy, and advocacy. So rewind now, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. Yeah, 10 years ago. Wow. So ten years ago, when I first got connected in a leadership role with OCA, it started as the liaison between the Ohio Counseling Association and the OCSW MFT board, which is our state licensure board. And it didn't get connected there because I was super invested in, licensure boards or policy in the Ohio Administrative Code. It became this, I was in this space where I was going, hey, I think there's some things that we can do and that we can serve our clients better. And then other people around me said, yeah, actually, what you're talking about might be able to be informed by connecting with the licensure board. And I think if I was honest with myself at the beginning, I was probably like, man, no. One, you got the wrong person if you want me to serve in a leadership role here. Two, I think you're wrong. Like maybe that is, but I think I can make a bigger impact over here. But as I was just continually pushed in this direction, the meaning and purpose that came out of this for me was the fact that I saw that my impact for the things that mattered most to me, and that was ultimately my clients and my students, and how counseling is able to increase in its effectiveness as a service, that the impact was most greatly influenced by my work with these governmental bodies or these governmental agencies. Because what I realized, which I didn't love in the past, and now I'm realizing, and many of our listeners already realize from many facets of their life, is whether we like it or not. Part of social justice, or part of the work that we are embedded in, is the reality that our systems and structures are informed by governmental agencies, right? Our systems and structures are informed by our scope of practice. Our systems and structures and what we can or cannot do, how we serve our clients, have many influences, but they are outlined and the boundaries are established by these governmental bodies, whether it be legislators establishing our Ohio Revised Code and what counseling looks like here in the state of Ohio, recognizing that the work that we do is informed by these governmental policies and by scope of practice by legislators who say this is what counseling can do or can't do, and then the Ohio Administrative Code and the licensure board that says, well, this is how these things are going to look. I realized that my impact was much greater. And so from this, being able to see the impact, being able to see how relationships can be built, and how then not only me, but my students and my clients and counselors all around the state can act or engage differently with their clients. They can remove barriers, they can serve them
Yeah.
better by these small moves or these big moves within legislative. That's where the meaning and purpose came from. So it wasn't something where I was like, man, I'm just super passionate about advocacy. Passionate about is making a
Yeah.
difference. What I was passionate about, making counseling as effective as possible. And then through this, continual over the past 10 years, leadership and development. And I'd still say I'm not an expert in policy. I'm not an expert in political science. There are people out there that study this. There are lobbyists out there, and this is one reason why we're connected with our lobbyists here at the Ohio Counseling Association. There are people that are professionals at that. But when we can team up with those, and when we can say, hey, here's a system and structure where counselors are bringing the stories of their clients, and we're organizing this, and we're serving as experts and combining that with the systems and structures that we have in place, the impact has been phenomenal. And this has been both positively positioned in the sense of positive changes we can make. This has also been positioned or cultivated by us trying to fight off some things that would have really negatively impacted our field and the delivery of services and our clients. And so there's both of those that are motivating factors and that provide a ton of meaning and purpose. And I know we say these words like advocacy and legislation, policy, and those scare people away. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're increasing the effectiveness, we're increasing the ability of our work with clients to have a bigger impact on their life, to have a bigger impact on the worlds and the communities in which we
Mhm.
live, and therefore allowing this to be a more effective service.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, many of those things providing meaning and
Yeah,
purpose
like
for me.
no counselor, client alike are an island. And so the system and um, especially like the political systems and legislative systems have an impact on our daily lives and our profession, as well as like the people we serve in our profession. And so, yeah, it sounds like this has been a big motivation of making those changes for the people we serve. Can you share with us a little bit more about what specifically the Government Relations Committee does?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm sure you can look at, our website, ohiocounseling.org. You can go and look at the bylaws, and it will tell you word for word what we do. The operational definition, or what we do with the Government Relations Committee, is that we engage with, we advocate with, we introduce, we oversee things that are happening. So anything in the state of Ohio that revolves around legislation, policy, or governmental agencies or affairs, our team is positioned to interact with. So I say interact with because that interaction looks different depending on what arm of our committee or what agenda we're working on. But we interact with these agencies on a ton of different levels. So what this looks like is the Government Relations Committee is comprised of a handful of individuals that are representatives from different groups. So in the Ohio Counseling Association, we have divisions and we have chapters. Divisions and chapters are groups that are separated either by geographic location or they're separated by interest group, right? So if I live in Central Ohio, I am a member of COCA just inherently because my geographic location in COCA is the Central Ohio Counseling Association, which is all the counselors in Ohio. And so I'm connected with them. And so the Government Relations Committee, what we want to do is we want to make sure that every single interest group and every single geographic location, their voice is heard and their voice is represented. And that way, when we're interacting with governmental agencies, we have that represented. So the Government Relations Committee is a handful of individuals, either from geographic locations all around the state or by interest groups. So we have a ton of different interest groups, whether you're working in groups, whether you're working in college settings, right? Whatever these interest groups are, whether we're working with specific populations. And those interest groups have a representative, what we call a liaison, to the Government Relations Committee. So the Government Relations Committee is made up of all these liaisons. So there's, say there's 20 people within the Government Relations Committee, and all of those individuals are also on the board for each one of these divisions or chapters. And so what we then do as the Government Relations Committee is we take all of these people and we interact with the licensure board. So one of the things is we have a representative that goes to the licensure board. They go to their meetings every other month. They're a member of OCA and they're a member of the Government Relations Committee. And we go just to hear what's happening at the licensure board. Over our many, many years of relationship, even predating me, a lot of the great relationships that were engaged with, Ryan Pickett and Ryan Palo and Vicky Kress, and even prior to that, and Tom Davis, this long lineage of individuals that have served on the board and in these capacities, but also within OCA. We have built this relationship. So not only do we go to the board and hear what's happening, but they also value us. They value what we do as an association. They value our expertise. They value our systems and structures of, hey, we're thinking about how this policy, or we're thinking about how supervision's impacting the state. We're thinking about hours for supervision and education standards and all of these things. And so we've built this relationship to where the licensure board is also asking us, hey, OCA, what do you think about this? How will this impact the work that some of your counselors are doing? How will this really happen? Because in these governmental bodies, we have ideas of change, but sometimes what we envision change to be isn't operationalized the way that we think of it in theory, right? And so we built this great relationship. And so the Government Relations Committee has someone that goes to the licensure board meetings, and then they come back, and we can provide the licensure board with research and with information, with opinions or positions from our membership. And that's all because of the collective voice for the Government Relations Committee. So that's one facet, the licensure board liaison. We're also a part of a couple different groups or coalitions. So there are two main coalitions that we're a part of, where we're going and we're having conversations with other mental health individuals, or with insurance bodies or groups, to try to make sure that we're advocating and we're interacting with insurance companies, and that they're hearing our voice, and that we're advocating for our clients and how they interface with third-party care management and insurance. And so we have these different coalitions that we're involved in that then engage with policy and advocacy and legislation. We also are engaged with legislators directly. So when a bill is introduced into the legislator, we then, as a committee, look at that bill and we go, okay, how will this bill impact the services that we provide? How will it impact our clients, first and foremost? How will it impact our profession? How will it impact the things that we value, the things that are inherent in our profession, the humanistic and social justice aspects? So when a bill is introduced, we look at it, and then sometimes we develop a strategic plan and we go, okay, this is something that's really going to impact us in a positive way. So then what the Government Relations Committee will do is organize support for that bill. And how do we support that? And that way we can get it passed. That way it will make a positive impact. Or if a bill is introduced and it will negatively impact us, how can we organize to oppose that bill? How can we make sure that our legislators are hearing from their constituents and our members that, hey, this isn't a great deal and a great idea, and I'm a counselor, and this bill, if passed, will impact negatively the work that I'm able to do, or the work that we're able to do in our communities in mental health. And so we interact directly with legislators. We're also the main source or conduit if we want to impact by introducing a bill. We want to impact the work that we do, or we're hearing up in Northwestern Ohio that there's something that's happening on the local level, that we can then meet up with a legislator and say, hey, we'd like to introduce this bill that will allow these services to be more effective. Then we interact and we go and identify a legislator, and we do the organization to figure out what's the best way, what's the best avenue to be able to introduce this bill, to be able to pass this bill. We did this maybe most recently and on the largest scale yet with the compact bill. And so there was a compact bill many years ago that we were able to introduce into the legislator because we thought it would be a great idea. And this is an overall national agenda that's being invested in. And so we then identified a legislator, worked on introducing this bill, worked on the support and the management of how we can advocate for that. And we were able to get the compact bill over the finish line. And so that's just one example of how we interact with legislators. And then there are other small kind of tangential ways that we can just interact, and we can inform or influence policy in certain areas that ultimately will impact our clients and the work that we do. So Government Relations Committee, a big title just to mean we are listening, we are engaged in, and we are active when it comes to all things legislation and policy that may or may not impact our field.
Yeah, and I understand like some of the large stuff that you also contribute to would be the Legislative Advocacy Day that OCA hosts each year, and I know that we recently had that, and one of our guests last month, or I guess it was earlier this month. I don't know what day it is ever. um, had given a nice plug for how that went, and or not plug how that went, but how like she was planning to go, and how like in the past they've gone. Really excited about it coming up. It's now come and gone. How did Legislative Advocacy Day 2024 go for our group?
Yeah. So maybe the listeners are well aware of this then because of your guests and because of their involvement. Legislative Advocacy Day is one of the biggest manifestations of our work, or rather, the interface or interaction of the work that we do as a committee all year round with the members, right? And there's a lot of things that happen within the OCA that are just a lot of really good work and hard work that frankly we just don't have the time to publicize or to like I think this is just inherent in the work that we do as counselors, even our counselor educators, but then also our association, where there's a lot of great work, and one of the barriers to event to interface or interact with our members on a large scale, and also with the things that we're doing. And so what Legislative Advocacy Day is, it's a one day event in the spring where the government relations is how do we communicate that and how do we let people know of the great work that's happening. This is our biggest committee hosts any counselor across the state that wants to come with us, and we host them here in Columbus. We host them at the State House. And what Legislative Advocacy Day is, it's an organized effort to be able to get members of OCA or non-members, just frankly counselors across the state, get them to interact with their legislators. So their state representative, their state senator, their elected officials. This is a day where we orchestrate for them to be able to engage in a conversation with their elected officials. And so it's a big day long. Although we meet with the legislators, that's only one component of it. When they're not meeting with their legislators, we're also having these presentations. We're having legislators come and talk to the group at large. We're having governmental officials, whether they be directors of some governmental agency at OMOS, or whether they be the Ohio Department of Insurance or Medicaid, all these organizations. Sometimes we'll have someone come talk, and they'll talk about an agenda that they're working with, or an initiative that they're engaged with. And so this is something that I get super pumped up about. It's one day that we put a lot of energy and effort. To get to your question, though, it went awesome. So we had about 85 individuals here at the State House this past beginning of April. And we just had, other than the room being really hot, because we had a really warm day outside, and this is a big governmental building. We're actually in the Rife Tower, which is right across the State House. That's where we host most of the day. And then we go to the State House to meet with our senators, or the Rife Tower is also the building that holds our state representatives. Other than it being really hot because the boiler system and transitioning, and if you were there, you know exactly what I mean. Other than that, it was a perfect day. So we had about 85 individuals that came. Our speakers were awesome. They were engaged. We had 2 legislators that came and talked to us about their position, about what it means to be a legislator. They helped inform our audience of how can we really make a difference, right? When we're working with clients and we experience barriers, what's the most effective way to interact or to take an idea and then get it implemented? It needs to go through legislation. We also had individuals from the Ohio Department of Insurance come and talk to us about some initiatives and some work, and so getting information to our members. We had a phenomenal lunch. We host lunch every year, so that way we can keep kind of working through it. And we have Kadoba and Amy, our executive director here at the Ohio Counseling Association, just threw an awesome event. It's a long day in the sense that we're there from about 9 till 3 or 4, but it's a long day in the sense that it does not stop. I mean, we are going because we want to jam pack, and once again, we want to be efficient with our time and effective in all that we do. But I would say this event, and they're all great, but this event was the best yet because of combination of factors. We had an increase of students. So we had different universities across the state that are recognizing the value in this for their students. I tell my students all the time that legislative advocacy will move your professional identity development. So, what does it mean to be a counselor? It will move your understanding of that much farther and much greater in that amount of time than I could do in a classroom over an entire semester. Right, as a practicing counselor, it allows me to engage with different people in different specialty areas, to hear information from across the state, and it moves my understanding of what it means to be a counselor. It allows me to feel bigger and connected in the meaning and purpose for what we're doing, and all of that happens within 5 hours there, 6 hours at the state house. And we did some really good work too. We advocated for a couple key agenda items that we just want people to know. We thanked our legislators for some recent stuff that had been enacted or had been passed. Because all the time these legislators are hearing people complain about things. We also wanted to be able to support them and go, hey, we appreciate your hard work and your efforts in that. And so, yeah, it was a phenomenal day. If you weren't able to make it this year, make sure to check it out next year. Every spring it happens. The last couple of years, it's been around April. We try to plan that strategically because the legislators are in session sometimes and they have committee meetings and there are things that are happening. And so it's difficult to schedule. And so it's not the same day every year, but it'll happen sometime in the spring next year. If people weren't able to make it, be there. I mean, I know it's a sacrifice. You have to take a day off work. If you're not in the Columbus area, you have to travel. But here's what I can promise. One, it'll make a difference and an impact in our field. And two, it'll make a difference in your understanding, your
Mhm.
connectedness to the profession. I don't know about you, Marisa, but there are some
Yeah.
times where I'm like, man, I feel like I'm in this alone, where I feel connected. I'm seeing client after client, and that's great. But sometimes I just get disconnected, and I even go like, am I
Yeah.
doing good work? Am I connected there? It's event like Legislative
Yeah.
Advocacy Day that can reaffirm, can rejuvenate us for the great work that we're doing, empower us, and make us feel connected to a greater meaning and purpose.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I think it's pointing out like how sometimes and some of our other guests have pointed this out too in the past. This profession can be really isolating, and as an educator, I often talk about advocacy and how certainly we can advocate when we're in session with clients, right? And try and advocate on those levels, but like this gives an alternative perspective too, or an additional perspective is probably the better way to say that, so that people understand like it is, how to do it on a more macro level. And like you said, changes sort of their perspective on the profession, maybe gives like a feeling of what you earlier referred to of like, I'm making a difference.
Yeah, and I tell people this all the time when I'm talking about advocacy, and I will say one of the really cool things we did this year too, is Heidelberg University. I've done this in the past a couple times where their students have invited me or their faculty have invited me up to talk to their students in preparation to Legislative Advocacy Day, because this is a day, once again, you get in, you buckle on your seatbelt and we fly through this day. And so there's a lot of information that if you're a participant or if you're a student, you're like, whoa, what are we talking about? What is this bill? I don't even know what this means. And we just have to kind of push through. And
Yeah.
so several years ago, we implemented this event for Legislative Advocacy Day where I went to Heidelberg and I talked to their students and I kind of slowed it down a little bit and let them know, hey, here's what you're going to see and here's what you're going to hear and here's where you're going to be and here's the meaning and purpose behind it. Some of the things that we don't have the ability to do because of how much information we have to jam pack into a day. But this year, Heidelberg did that and they extended it to universities all across the state. And so we had 3 or 4 different universities represented. And we talked about what legislation was and what advocacy is. And especially as a student, but even as professionals, when we hear advocacy, we can get a little intimidated, like I said previously, and we don't know what advocacy means. And so I break it down like this. Advocacy is 3 things: to be able to advocate for our clients, especially in the legislative sphere. We have to be able to do 3 things. The first is we have to be able to tell stories. And I don't know anyone better positioned to tell stories of our clients than counselors. I mean, this is kind of what we're trained to do, at least to listen to stories and to hear stories and to identify the successes and the strengths and the triumphs and to be able to connect and empathize in the difficulties. We naturally are the keeper of stories, and I'm not saying that we go out and we breach HIPAA and PHI and we're
Right.
communicating information we shouldn't. But in those stories, we're able to recognize what are some barriers or what are some things that really allow people to excel. And so when we're talking about legislative advocacy, we're storytellers.
Mhm.
Once again, I'm not talking about, our grandfathers who sat around the campfire, or at least did, or on the farm and would tell me all these stories, and I was captivated because he was a phenomenal storyteller. I'm not talking about that, right? We don't have to be a great, filmmaker to be able to tell a story. What I mean is we're just able to hear the successes, the strengths, the struggles of our clients. We're able to make sense of those in some way, and then we're able to tell other people about that in an appropriate way. So that's what advocacy is first telling stories. Every counselor I've ever met has been well positioned to tell stories. The second piece is legislative advocacy. In order to be successful, it has to be organized. Here's the beauty of the Ohio Counseling Association and Governmental Relations Committee is you don't personally need to be organized. You don't personally need to know who to talk to or where to go. That's the power of what we do. This is the organization to make sure that this one story that you have connects in a way that's meaningful and can move the needle. So we have to tell stories, we have to be organized. And then the third piece, which I know a lot of our students feel inadequate at, I know a lot of our professionals feel inadequate at times. But the third piece is in order to engage in legislative advocacy, we serve as an expert. And I know all the time people go, well, I'm not an expert, especially students. Here's what I'm here to tell you is that everyone listening to this podcast, everyone that's engaged in one semester of coursework at the counseling level, anyone that's seen clients, you are an expert. You hold some level of expertise that's beneficial to the legislator. Marisa, you might know the answer to this, but if I were to ask you how many legislators in our legislation are currently licensed counselor, the answer is zero, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
answer is zero. We don't have any licensed counselors
Mhm.
in our legislature. Now, we do have some individuals that are engaged in the mental health space in
Yeah.
some capacity, but we have no counselors. And
Mhm.
so any knowledge that we have or expertise is more than the legislators. And these are the people that are making decisions. And I will say, by and large, the vast majority of our legislators, they want to connect with experts. They want to know, hey, I'm about to make this decision on policy. How will this impact my counselors? How will this impact the mental health of my community? And so they go to the expert. By and large, we do have a couple legislators that maybe don't want to hear it, and maybe they think they have the answer, but that is the outlier. That is not the majority of them. So when we can go in and serve as expert and say our information and say what it means to be a counselor and say what we do and say the power that we hold to be able to collaborate with clients and be able to engender what they have inherent in them to be able to make the community better, every legislator wants to find the solution, right? Every legislator in southeastern Ohio right now wants to find the solution to the opioid epidemic, and they want to find the solution to workforce development, and they want to find the solution to developing our children and adolescents in a healthy way in the social emotional. They all want to find a solution to it, but the reality is they don't have a solution to it at times because they're not experts. They don't know what this looks like. We can serve as experts and they can collaborate, and then they can go, wow, what I'm hearing in you and what you're saying you're able to do, this seems like it might fill a void here. And so we serve as experts. So even if we don't feel like an expert at time, we do have some expertise. We also have the ability to say, hey, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but I have a whole association of people that somewhere there does have the answer to it. So that's a really cool thing. So when we're talking about legislative advocacy, and I might have digressed here, my
You're
apologies for that.
fine.
But we're talking about those three things. We're talking about telling stories,
Mhm.
we're talking about organizing, and we're talking about serving as expert. And so if you feel like, man, I can't do advocacy, break it down. Don't do advocacy. Tell a story. Bring in the organization and serve as an expert. And those three things, then the byproduct is that we're advocating for our clients and we're doing this in legislative spaces when it comes to policy
Yeah.
in legislation.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate your passion. Like it's cool. I know everyone listening won't get to watch this necessarily, but like I think that we can hear it in your voice, even the passion that you have for doing this type of work. And um, I think of something I recently read. It was a psychology media outlet. It's talking about psychiatry following a new trend of engaging in like a psychosocial approach. And I'm like, wait, that's the whole foundation of what I was trained on, like from day one in a counseling program. And so, like, I hope that that kind of stuff empowers us too. Like, we're doing the work, and our knowledge is very valuable. And learning from our clients' experiences certainly helps us then, push the needle. But also like what you learn even before working with clients is incredibly valuable to help advocate.
Yeah, and even what I'm hearing you saying that too, Marissa, is this interdisciplinary work or this collaboration of the sense like, hey, that's what I was trained in, and is there something that I can do to help push this agenda forward and to help be able to enhance this? And I think that's one of the reasons why. And I know this is an OCA outlet. I'm heavily involved with OCA, but I'd encourage all of our listeners, whether it be OCA or OSCA, whether it be something else, get connected. Like get connected to the people that are doing the things that you're passionate about, because you're going to be able to do more in that initiative or more in that endeavor than you would be alone. And it's also going to allow you to, bring your strengths and your skills to the table and all of those. So whether it be OCA or OSCA or ACA or psychiatry or beekeeping or cultivation and gardening, whatever it might be, this is the power of being able to connect with other people. And this life is hard enough. I tell my clients that all the time. We weren't designed to do this alone. And so anytime we can connect with other people, which is one of the reasons why I love my job, advocacy cannot happen in and of itself. We do leverage grassroots advocacy, which grassroots advocacy is this movement that happens at the core organization or the base level. So the members of our association, that is what we're founded on. But you can't do it alone. If you're doing it alone, you will not be successful. It'll be tiring. It'll be exhausting. You will be defeated. But when you can come alongside, when we can do this together, when we can harness our strengths and share in that to be able to serve the common good, that's when some really cool things happen. I mean,
Yeah,
look at this podcast.
right.
This is one of the,
Yeah.
that you're leading the charge on.
There is power in community. Yeah. So, a lot of what we've been talking about so far are the political spaces that we as counselors can inhabit, but we also know that we serve in these clinical spaces. How do you feel like the balance between those two has been valuable to your own and others' professional development?
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive, right? We're talking about these in the legislative space, but they're all predicated on the clinical space. And one of the things that we're kind of leaning up or experiencing now is the workforce, right? So this is a purely clinical space, is being able to have counselors in this space to provide clinical services. But that's now trickling over into the place where we're looking at policy, and we have a bunch of people saying, hey, we don't have enough
Mm.
counselors. We need more counselors. And so what does this look like? And inherently, whether we like it or not, the clinical space of that, just providing services and filling our vacancies and having enough individuals working in CBHCs, and having enough people to be able to serve the needs. Um, that is a big clinical deal. And now we're looking at it, whether we like it or not, of, well, how is policy and how is legislation impacting this, either positively or negatively? So we see this permeation between the two, and that's one of the big things. I know this isn't necessarily the question that you asked, but where my mind went to the integration of those two, is I always come back when we're talking about workforce development. There is no doubt every counselor feels this. This is why we're in a profession with high burnout, is because the work is really exhausting, and we're especially seeing this surge post COVID, with the combination of a bunch of things: stigma reduction, the elimination of coping mechanisms and resources, the increased identification of need, where we're seeking counseling, is that we have a work
Yeah.
shortage. There are not enough counselors. Here's my position on this whole entire conversation: is not only do we have not enough counselors, but the answer is not to just make more counselors. The answer is to make more better counselors. So one of the things that I'm fearful of, is that not only is our workforce development just pure numbers impacted, but it's also being hurt because the counselors that we may have are subjected to potential changes in policy that might make it so that when we introduce new counselors into the field, they have lower standards, they have lower qualifications. That way we can get them into the work field quicker. But in turn, are we really making a dent into the services, or are we really helping provide solutions to our clients if we're not properly equipped? So I don't think we just need more counselors. I think we need more better counselors. And I think this is a really relevant conversation about the integration between the clinical space and the advocacy space and how those two overlap. Is we have to be intentional, because there's a lot of people and legislators that go, we need more counselors in my community. Well, what are the policies that are restricting counselors from becoming counselors? What is the trajectory, and what is the overall pipeline for individuals to come into this field? Are there policies that are making this less attractive so people aren't even going into the field? Are there barriers that are really difficult? And I want to ensure that we're holding our high level of standard for training, especially
Yeah.
here in the state of Ohio, accompanying that with increased ability for people to access this profession, be able to access education, and then jump into the workspace without reducing their ability to provide really good services. Because in my mind, that will just exacerbate the problem. Not only do we have a deficiency of counselors, but now we have a deficiency of counselors, and we have counselors that are out there that maybe are exacerbating symptoms or exacerbating the experience of our clients, or clients are going, I went to counseling 2 or 3 times and it didn't work for me. And is that because we didn't, set up our counselors well enough, equip them well enough to be able to give a really good quality
Yeah.
service to our
Yeah. And it makes
clients?
me think of like the balance between some of the other things that may not fully be workforce development, but like what other resources can we create in our communities, or add to our communities, so like maybe there is less of a need, because we know like if people are surviving, that's different than thriving, and that there are certainly going to be things that we can have in place that help people, so that their mental health is not deteriorating to a point that like they're needing crisis services or even just more frequent services, from the professionals in those communities. Yeah. Yeah, this is shifting gears a little bit, but I feel like it's along the same lines. W- we're talking about resilience a lot. We hear that word a lot in our, professional spaces, and I think even beyond. What trends are you seeing in the field about like supporting that, building that resilience within our clients and communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know you're not asking me from an academic perspective or a research-based perspective, which is good because I don't know that I have a ton to offer. But just simply from my space, and I guess this is who I am, so I'll bring it back to it. But I do see a ton of resilience just in the work that we're doing and within our counselors, but then in our clients, as we're moving farther kind of away from COVID. And I'm sure there's been tons of conversations, and I don't have any, empirical evidence, rather just experience of this. Because I think COVID was this experience where all of our coping strategies, or our resilience, or as I like to define, the ability to bounce back. It's actually kind of funny. Years ago, when I was doing my doctoral program, me and my dear friend Dr. Matthew Fullen, who's at Virginia Tech now, formerly here in the state of Ohio. We did a group with an adult day center off, and they co-constructed this beautiful image and this definition that obviously is in line with resilience. But one individual said it's a like a basketball, like a basketball, Livingston Avenue here in Columbus, where we went in and we talked to a bunch of older adults, and we asked them to define resilience and what does it mean to be resilient. And I bounced the ball, and resilience is the ability to bounce back. And one of the things that I think I'm seeing in all of us, my friends, my family, my clients, is that in COVID, a lot of our coping strategies that allowed us to bounce back, or that we utilized, healthy or unhealthy, were stripped from us. We no longer had those ability, and so we found
Yeah.
ourselves not being able to bounce back. And so what it demanded is that we evolved, or we adapt, and we go, okay, my social connections and these social outlets, or this ability to engage in human connection and community, those are stripped from me. But how do I adapt, and how do I develop coping mechanisms? So we saw this adaptability, I think. I also think that this is one reason why people are so much more willing, and I would assume stats would back me up on this, but I guess I don't know, of people willing to go to counseling because they recognize that hey, I need to adapt, and I need to change, and I need to be able to engage in these coping mechanisms, even if not the specific ones, but that serve the same purpose. And so I see this in my clients all the time, that there's this natural ability to adapt, and to cope, and that comes from their internal strengths. And I'm seeing this in the field of counseling, and I'm seeing this even in the legislative sphere. And I guess I don't want to be a broken record, but I'll go back to my statement of, I think resilience is being bred out of the communities in which we're involved in which we're connected in. Legislative Advocacy Day the ways that we can fight burnout and resilience in our own and providers or counselors here in the state of Ohio is go to events like Legislative Advocacy Day. And I know it's like, wow, then I have to take a day off work and then I'm more behind on notes and then I'm more behind in these things. But the thing that Legislative Advocacy Day or any other event is, I can go and I can surround myself with other people that are experiencing the same thing and I can get new ideas. And if nothing else, I can just feel recharged and I can be around someone that's passionate about this. And I'm not super passionate about it, but I'm energized for a little bit. And so the more we're engaging in those spaces, the more we're listening to awesome podcasts like this, where people can come on and share their voice and we can just pull some of those things. And, I might be saying things that people go, oh, legislative advocacy, I'm not going to listen to that episode, but there's someone else that's completely different than me that's bringing their ideas and we can get energized by that. So the more we can engage in those spaces, the more we can engage in our resilience and bounce back. And yeah, there's a lot of difference and a lot of things that are easy to point to as flaws or deficiencies. But one thing that I'm perpetually encouraged by my students and by my clients and by my communities is their resiliency.
Yeah, yeah. The bounce back ability can be supported by like community. Like we've seen it happen in our profession and in our organization. And, I don't know like widespread statistics, but I think like just showing the adaptability with how we serve our clients, right? Like teletherapy was kind of taboo, I think, when I was training to become a counselor. And now, like, post COVID era, like, right? It's probably just as, if not more, sought out modality. And we know that there's been increasing numbers for that. And I think sometimes like shift in perspective from clients too, because like maybe formerly they never would have liked that idea, but now it's like, oh yeah, that makes life a little bit easier. I don't have to make all these other arrangements to seek help. And so that's shown how our profession has been resilient, and also how clients have adapted as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, these are conversations for other times, but all of that shift is also why we see like the compact happening, and as we can increase our portability for our ability to provide services, we'll just be able to continue to enhance and grow and recognize things that maybe weren't available to us previously, because everything we do in this world makes some things more possible, right? So this shift or this bounce back or what we thought was a struggle and then how we started to engage in it, it made some things more possible. Everything we do also makes some things more impossible. And this is kind of the multiplistic thinking that we can have around really difficult things that I think enhance our resilience. Is it's not right or wrong or good or bad, but by making this decision, by doing telehealth, by changing this policy, by introducing this bill, that's going to make some things more possible. And it will also make some things more impossible. And so we need to be critical and evaluate those things and go, is the possibilities worth the things that it will make impossible? And those are just really good things to think about, and things that, I think as we have conversations about, will enhance our ability to get it right when we bounce back. It doesn't mean we're going to bounce back to the same height. Maybe we do. Maybe we bounce back and we're better than ever, but also maybe we bounce back and it's only 50%, and that's okay, because everything we're doing is just trying to calibrate, is this the best thing? And does this make the things that I value or that are important more possible? And frankly, to bring it back to the government relations committee, that's what we're always evaluating, right? Because there are policies, there are legislation that sometimes people go, I'm not happy with that. And I get that might not be something that you're super supportive of or happy about. But what we're evaluating is, does this change or does this policy make the things we value as a profession, as an association, more possible? Also recognizing that it might make some things more impossible. And that's just the complexity of life and the ability then to persevere through those that will give us resiliency and the ability to bounce back.
Yeah, wonderful. So, kind of wrapping things up, we ask this last question on every single episode of the podcast. The name of the podcast is Ohio Counseling Conversations. And so we're always curious, from your perspective, what important conversations you think counseling professionals should be having with each other and or their clients in our state.
Yeah, so I think important conversations that they should be having with each other are kind of a couple of things, but workforce development. I think that this is a big one that we should be having. We are having in small circles, but having with each other is what are the things in my world that would allow me to do my job better,
Mm-hmm.
right? What are the things that maybe are making my job difficult, right? And we hear all of these things. We hear pay, and we
Yeah.
recognize that pay by and large is not sufficient or equivalent with the amount of work or the difficulty of work that we're experiencing, especially in our community behavioral health centers. Uh, and so having these conversations of what those look like, because our profession and how it is delivered here in the state of Ohio already looks different now than it did 5 years ago, but it will look drastically different 5 years from now than it does today. And if we're not intentional about what are these barriers, what are the things we want to see, that is going to look different in ways that make a lot more things impossible for us, and things that we're kind of responding to and we're retroactive to rather than being proactive to. So this is a conversation. One of those things that I mentioned earlier that I'm fearful of is that these changes to increase workforce development or to be able to increase our services are actually going to leave us with a profession, or leave us with standards, leave us with policies that then make the product that we provide less effective
Mhm.
than it is currently.
Yeah.
And in 5 years from now, if we have an entire field that's not very effective, that's going to then hurt the things that we need, and that's
Right.
increased pay and increased support, because we're not going to be able to have the efficacy behind the work that we're doing. And this isn't a sounding of the alarm, right? I
Right.
mean, this is just a reality.
Yeah.
We need more good counselors. And so how can we get more good counselors? How can we get the people in our world that we know that are empathetic and who care and that want to support people? How do we get them to come into our field? That way they can enhance and harness that to be able to serve their clients and empower their clients to be able to impact our communities. And so having those conversations of what does that look like, and what are the barriers, and how do we have really healthy solutions that don't deteriorate the training or the product that we give, but does enhance our ability. And I think there are a lot of good things happening. One of the things that's happening is the ability to access supervision, something that was once hard here in our state is becoming easier and easier with the advances of technology, and geographic location no longer is a concern. So how do we then connect people with really valuable connections or information, and how do we get that supervision that can enhance my ability to become a better counselor by tapping into this expertise of someone all across the state, and just getting connected with those, and supporting our supervisors, and supporting our trainees, and supporting our dependent licensees to be able to do the really good work. I think there's a lot there for increasing our workforce development that we really do well. We just need to continue to enhance. So that's one
Yeah.
conversation I think is really important that we should have: is what does our practice look like? What does our profession look like? What are the services that we're providing, and how do we continue to develop those in really meaningful ways that reaches the demand that we're seeing all across our
Yeah,
state?
wonderful. And we can be sure to link OCA's supervision directory in the show notes to even kind of piggyback off of that to make sure that that's something um, when people are trying to access that. Um,
Yeah, you might have talked about this on here, Marisa, but those of you that are listening that don't know anything about that, our supervision directory is exactly that. I kind of called it when we were developing it the e-harmony of supervision, because I hear all the time from people where they go, I want to work here, but they don't have a supervisor. Or when I'm working here, I don't get my training supervision hours for my independent license. Or this is a field that social workers are predominantly in, and there's not a huge value or need for me here, but this is something I'm passionate about. One of the ways that we found to be able to enhance all of that is I want to get you connected with the supervisor. And we've done research, and we've indicated that we do have plenty of supervision designations here in the state. We could always use more, but we have enough. But one of the key things we're always hearing is I just don't know how to access them. Where do I go? How do I find them? And so we created this eHarmony that you can link
mhm.
to, that they can jump on, and you can go see who's providing supervision, and where are they located, and do they do virtual
Yeah.
supervision, and what are their expertise, and all of these information. That way you can get paired up with someone that's really good fit for you and can really advance your professional identity development. And all it is just connecting those resources. So if you're a supervisor and you want to be on it, reach out to us. We'll get you on the directory. That way people can find you. And if you're looking for supervision and that's a barrier for you, jump on that and go and try to find that match for you that will be a good support.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. Sean, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so grateful for all of your service to the profession, to the state, and to OCA, and really grateful that you joined us for the podcast today to have such a meaningful conversation.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. These conversations can't happen enough. When I went into academia, I thought that these were the conversations I'd have all the time, and that this would be awesome. And that's not the case. We have a lot of faculty meetings over things aren't great and difficult conversations, but these are the ones that really feed me and fill me and continue to encourage me. And so thanks for inviting me on here. Thanks for creating a space for those to happen, Marisa, and your team, because these are valuable, and this is how we continue to make good efforts, and we continue to go, wow, that's a really good idea, let's push it forward. And for us to say these things and go, actually, that's not a great idea, and as I say it out loud and hear it, there's probably better solutions. And so thanks for creating these spaces.
Yeah. And thanks for joining this space. Thank you, listeners, for listening and sharing this space with us today. We will catch you next time on Ohio Counseling Conversations.
Ohio Counseling Conversations is on a mission to make this podcast meaningful to you, and we can't do that without your help. A feedback form is linked in the show notes for this episode and is also available on the OCA Linktree. If you have any recommendations for topics or guests or any other general feedback, you can let us know by using the form. We welcome your thoughts so that we can continue to develop the podcast and grow as creators. If you are interested in joining the team or being a guest, you can also reach us by emailing ohiocounselingconversations@gmail.com. We value your insight. Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to follow us so you can stay up to date with Ohio Counseling Conversations online and wherever you listen to podcasts.
This podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Counseling Association's Media, Public Relations, and Membership Committee and its podcast subcommittee. This podcast features original music selections by Elijah Satoru Wood and our closing song, A Creation Discotheque by Who AD. Views, beliefs, or references mentioned in this episode do not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the Ohio Counseling Association. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect the view of the Ohio Counseling Association or any of its officials. Thank you.